early 1980s, nestled in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, there was a small, unassuming town called Darrington, Washington. Known for its logging industry and tight-knit community, Darrington was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a steady, predictable pace. In the summer of 1983, a series of events began to unfold that would forever change the fabric of this quiet town. It started with the disappearance of a local teenager, 17-year-old Emily Thompson. Emily was last seen leaving her part-time job at the local diner, heading home on foot as she had done countless times before. When she didn't arrive home that evening, her parents grew concerned and contacted the local authorities. A search party was quickly organized, comprising local law enforcement and volunteers from the community. They scoured the town and the surrounding forested areas, but found no trace of Emily. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to wane. The town was gripped by a palpable sense of fear and uncertainty. Then, just as the community was beginning to come to terms with Emily's disappearance, another teenager vanished. Michael Reynolds, 16, was last seen riding his bicycle near the edge of town. His bike was later found abandoned on a dirt path leading into the woods, but there was no sign of Michael. Panic set in. 2 teenagers had disappeared without a trace in a matter of weeks. Rumors began to circulate about a possible predator lurking in the woods, and parents kept their children indoors. The once peaceful town was now overshadowed by fear. Local law enforcement, overwhelmed and lacking resources, reached out to the FBI for assistance. Special Agent Ranger Caldwell was assigned to the case. With years of experience in missing persons investigations, Caldwell approached the situation methodically. He interviewed family members, friends, and anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. During his investigation, Caldwell learned of an old, abandoned cabin deep within the forest, about 5 miles from town. Locals referred to it as the Hunter's Lodge, though no one could recall who had built it or when it was last occupied. It was a place shrouded in mystery and local folklore, with tales of it being haunted or used for nefarious purposes. With no other leads, Caldwell decided to investigate the cabin. He, along with a team of agents and local deputies, trekked through the dense forest to reach the secluded structure. The cabin was in a state of disrepair, with broken windows and a sagging roof. The door creaked ominously as they entered. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay. Dust particles danced in the beams of sunlight that pierced through the broken windows. The interior was sparse, with only a few pieces of broken furniture and remnants of what appeared to be old camping equipment. As they moved deeper into the cabin, they discovered a trap door hidden beneath a tattered rug. It led to a small, dark cellar. Descending into the cellar, the team was met with a sight that would haunt them forever. The cellar walls were lined with photographs of young individuals, some dating back decades. In the center of the room was a makeshift altar adorned with candles, some still burning, casting flickering shadows on the walls. But the most disturbing discovery was a journal placed meticulously on the altar. The journal contained detailed accounts of abductions, rituals, and sacrifices. The handwriting was erratic, with passages that seemed to be written by different individuals. The entries spoke of appeasing an ancient spirit that resided in the forest, demanding offerings to ensure the town's prosperity. As Caldwell flipped through the pages, he found recent entries detailing the abductions of Emily and Michael. The final entry was dated just 2 days prior, mentioning a final offering to be made to complete the ritual. Realizing the urgency, Caldwell and his team intensified their search efforts, focusing on the areas surrounding the cabin. They worked tirelessly, day and night, driven by the hope of finding the missing teenagers alive. Then, in a secluded clearing not far from the cabin, they made a grim discovery. The trapdoor was small, and reinforced with heavy iron hinges, its wooden surface scarred and worn. Agent Caldwell crouched down, brushing away the dust and debris to reveal a rusted padlock securing it shut. It felt out of place, too sturdy and purposeful for an otherwise dilapidated cabin. "Looks like someone wanted to keep something down there," Caldwell muttered, his voice low but steady. A deputy retrieved bolt cutters from the equipment bag, snapping the lock with a metallic crack that echoed through the cabin. Caldwell hesitated for a moment, his instincts telling him this was no ordinary search. The air grew colder, and a strange, almost imperceptible hum seemed to vibrate through the floor. With a nod, he gripped the trapdoor's handle and pulled. It opened with a reluctant groan, revealing a narrow wooden ladder descending into the dark. A faint, unpleasant smell wafted up, a mix of damp earth and something fouler, unidentifiable. "Flashlights on," Caldwell ordered, the team exchanging uneasy glances as they readied themselves. One by one, they descended, the ladder creaking under their weight. The space below was a crude, subterranean room, its walls lined with dirt and stone. The beams of their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing bizarre etchings carved into the walls. Strange symbols, jagged and chaotic, formed a pattern that seemed almost alive under the flickering light. "What the hell is this?" one of the deputies whispered, his voice trembling. In the center of the room was a small wooden table, and atop it, something that made the seasoned agents recoil. A collection of objects, personal items like a tarnished locket, a broken watch, and a child's toy. A stuffed bear, missing an eye. But what truly froze them was a series of Polaroid photos spread across the table, each one depicting a person with their eyes wide open in terror. Emily Thompson's face stared back at them from one of the photos. Another showed Michael Reynolds, his mouth agape as if screaming. Agent Caldwell's hand tightened around his flashlight. "These are our missing kids," he said grimly, his eyes scanning the rest of the room. A sudden, distant noise broke the heavy silence. A rhythmic tapping, faint but deliberate, echoed through the underground chamber. Everyone froze, their flashlights darting toward the direction of the sound. It seemed to come from deeper within the earth, beyond a narrow tunnel barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Caldwell motioned for silence, signaling two agents to stay back and secure the area, while he and a deputy approached the tunnel. The closer they got, the more distinct the sound became, a hollow, deliberate tapping, like bone against stone. "Who's there?" Caldwell called out, his voice firm but tinged with unease. The tapping stopped abruptly. Then, from the tunnel, a sound emerged that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. It was a faint whisper, unintelligible, but undeniably human. Caldwell hesitated only briefly before crawling into the tunnel, his flashlight piercing the oppressive darkness. The deputy followed close behind. The tunnel was claustrophobic, the walls brushing against their shoulders as they moved forward. The whispering grew louder, though the words remained garbled and nonsensical. Caldwell pushed onward, his flashlight revealing a larger chamber up ahead. What they saw when they entered made their blood run cold. The chamber was filled with crude wooden mannequins, each one dressed in tattered clothing. On closer inspection, the clothes matched the descriptions of the missing teenagers' outfits. The mannequins were arranged in a circle, their eyeless faces turned inward, as though frozen in some grotesque ritual. At the center of the circle was a pit. It was deep, its edges lined with the same jagged symbols as the walls in the first room. Caldwell shone his flashlight into the pit, but the beam didn't reach the bottom. A sense of overwhelming dread gripped him. The whispering returned, louder now, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was joined by a guttural, inhuman growl that reverberated through the chamber. The mannequins began to shift, their wooden limbs creaking as though animated by an unseen force. "Out! Now!" Caldwell yelled, backing away from the pit. But before they could retreat, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. A deafening roar erupted from the pit, and something massive and black began to rise, its form impossible to fully comprehend. It seemed to flicker in and out of existence, its surface writhing with countless, shifting faces. "Run!" Caldwell screamed, dragging the deputy back into the tunnel as the entity surged upward. The mannequins collapsed, splintering into pieces as the chamber filled with an unnatural wind, howling like tortured souls. They scrambled through the narrow passage, the walls seeming to close in on them as the whispers and growls grew louder, more chaotic. Reaching the first room, Caldwell yelled for the others to retreat. The team barely made it up the ladder before the trap door slammed shut behind them with a force that shook the cabin. Panting and wide-eyed, they stood in the ruined cabin, the whispers still faintly audible beneath their feet. Caldwell didn't hesitate. "We're sealing this place," he said, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. The team began to work, but before they could finish, a loud knocking came from the trap door. 3 deliberate knocks, then silence. Everyone froze, their breaths caught in their throats. The sound of the knocks echoed eerily through the empty cabin. It was slow and deliberate, as if someone, was on the other side of the trap door, waiting. "Secure the exit!" Caldwell ordered, his voice cracking slightly but still commanding. "Now!" One of the deputies approached the trap door cautiously, his hands trembling as he placed heavy furniture over it. They reinforced it with everything they could find: broken chairs, cabinets, even debris from the walls. But as soon as they finished, the knocking resumed. This time, it was louder. The entire cabin seemed to reverberate with each knock, and then a voice followed. It was soft, almost pleading, yet inhumanly distorted. "Help me, please!" Caldwell's blood ran cold. The voice was undeniably Emily's, but it sounded wrong. Stretched, hollow, like a recording played on damaged tape. "Don't listen," he said, stepping away. "It's trying to manipulate us." The voice shifted. "Michael, he's here, with me. Please, let us out." The air in the cabin grew heavier, oppressive. The temperature plummeted, their breaths visible as clouds of mist. One of the deputies, younger and clearly shaken, took a hesitant step toward the trap door. "What if it's really them?" he whispered. "It's not!" Caldwell barked, grabbing the deputy by the arm. "They're gone. Whatever's down there isn't them." But the voice continued, switching to a low, guttural growl. "You think you can leave? You brought us here. You belong here." Suddenly, the windows shattered, spraying shards of glass inward. A fierce wind whipped through the cabin, carrying with it the faint sound of the whispers and the metallic stench of decay. The trapdoor beneath the barricade began to rattle violently, as if whatever was beneath it was trying to break free. "Move!" Caldwell yelled, signaling everyone to exit the cabin. The team spilled into the forest, the unnatural wind following them, howling through the trees. Behind them, the cabin groaned and creaked, the walls bending inward, as if the structure itself was being consumed. They ran, the forest closing in around them. The once familiar woods seemed alien, each shadow stretching and twisting like grasping hands. The whispers followed them, growing louder, more insistent. Caldwell's flashlight flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw a figure in the distance, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette standing motionless among the trees. "Don't stop!" he shouted, pushing the group forward. As they reached the edge of the woods, the ground trembled violently, the whispers became screams, and behind them, a deafening roar erupted. Turning back, Caldwell saw the cabin implode, collapsing inward as if swallowed by the earth. A shockwave of air burst outward, knocking the team to the ground. When the dust settled, the cabin was gone. In its place was a gaping hole in the earth, lined with the same jagged symbols from the underground chamber. The team stared in silence, their faces pale with disbelief. Caldwell got to his feet, his chest heaving as he tried to steady his breath. "No one comes back here," he said, his voice firm. "Ever." They returned to town and filed their report, but it was incomplete. They left out the voices, the symbols, the impossible creature from the pit. Instead, they wrote it off as a structural collapse due to neglect. No one questioned them. But late that night, as Caldwell sat in his darkened home, a noise made him freeze. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. 3 deliberate knocks. He stared at his front door, his blood turning to ice, as the whispers began again, louder this time, just outside. "Help me! Please!" Caldwell didn't move. The knocks came again, louder this time, echoing through his quiet house. "Help me!" the voice repeated, growing more distorted with each word. "Please! You can't leave us!" He stared at the door, his mind racing. It couldn't be real. It had to be his imagination, a lingering effect of what they'd experienced in the woods. But deep down, he knew better. The voice shifted again, this time more urgent, almost accusing. "You brought us here. You owe us." The air in the room grew icy, his breath visible in the dim light. The whispering wasn't just coming from the door anymore. It was all around him. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, flickering as if alive. Caldwell's flashlight, which he hadn't even realized he was gripping, flickered on and off. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. Silence fell over the house, oppressive and suffocating. Caldwell slowly approached the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the lock. But just as his fingers grazed it, the whispering returned, louder than ever, erupting into an ear-piercing wail. The door exploded inward, slamming against the wall with a deafening crash. Caldwell stumbled backward, shielding his face from the splinters. The figure that stepped inside made his stomach drop. It was Emily. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her lips moved, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was a guttural, multi-layered cacophony that reverberated through the room. "You can't run," she said, her voice a horrifying blend of desperation and malice. "You let it out, and now it's everywhere." Behind her, the shadows surged, twisting into grotesque shapes. Faces emerged from the darkness, Michael, Roger, and countless others, their expressions frozen in terror. They moved toward him, their mouths opening wide, emitting the same unearthly wail. Caldwell turned and ran, his heart pounding. He barely made it to the kitchen before the shadows enveloped him, their cold tendrils gripping his arms and legs. He struggled, but it was like fighting quicksand. The more he fought, the tighter they held him. "You brought us here," Emily's voice echoed, "and now you'll stay with us." Caldwell screamed as the shadows consumed him, dragging him into the floor. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was Emily's face, her mouth curling into a twisted smile. When the deputies returned to Caldwell's house the next morning, they found the front door hanging off its hinges. The inside of the house was eerily cold, despite the warm sunlight streaming through the broken windows. There was no sign of Caldwell. What they did find, however, was a series of photographs scattered across the floor. Each one showed Caldwell, his face frozen in terror, staring directly at the camera. In the last photo, he was surrounded by shadows, his mouth open in a silent scream. The deputies sealed the house, calling it a missing persons case, but no one stayed inside for long. The air was too heavy, too wrong, and at night, neighbors swore they could hear faint knocking coming from the empty house. 3 deliberate knocks, followed by whispers that no one dared to repeat.